Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we will examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. When it comes to science education, one of the biggest debates involves how to teach labs and conduct experiments. Some schools feel that the only way to teach science is to be hands-on, and that means experiencing the dirty side of science, dissecting actual animals. Others find it expensive to replenish supplies every year and also find it challenging to properly and safely store those resources. While more and more schools are seeking digital resources to take the place of physical animals, there are still those who feel that there is something to be said for actually feeling the texture of the body, not just identifying the parts. Well, we may not end this debate anytime soon, but to delve further into this conversation, today we welcome Samantha Crowe, Manager of Science Education for PETA. Ms. Crowe, welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, of course, to all our listeners, to be clear, we are only really discussing the use of animals in K-12 and perhaps college science classes. We're not necessarily discussing the procedures of professional laboratories. So I just want to make that clear to our listeners out there today. Ms. Crowe, I want to get right into this conversation because a lot of our listeners, myself included, perform the basic frog dissections in school. And in fact, just last year, my son did a frog dissection in his middle school class. So what's really wrong with animal dissection?
I'm glad that you asked that. So animal dissection is outdated, it's cruel, and it's ineffective. It deters students from pursuing careers in science. It exposes students to carcinogens. And it is an inferior way to teach. Of course, PETA is opposed to dissecting animals because it is deadly for millions of animals every year. And we know that animals are not ours to use for any reason.
Where do these schools and other places get the animals that they use for dissection in the first place?
Well, there's no humane way to kill an animal who didn't want to die for dissection, right? So in slaughterhouses, animals have their throats cut while often still conscious. Their organs and babies are then cut from their abused bodies. A lot of animals also are captured in the wild. So, fishes and, other ocean animals, are collected in the wild, as are frogs. And then others are bred. And then many also come from slaughterhouses.
So you have some people that may say, well, what's really wrong with using animals from, say, animal shelters, because I know they also purchase animals from the shelters themselves. So what would be wrong with that? Because doesn't that really help with the problem of overcrowding in those shelters and kind of reduce the excess of strays that may be available?
I think that I've heard this argument before, and, people trying to justify, animal abuse in a classroom often say, well, what else, what happened to these organs from a slaughterhouse if students didn't dissect them? But, that's really a fallacy. There is a bigger picture. So, yes, the animal organs and, some animals do come from slaughterhouses. That is true. However, teachers and, other educators and administrators may be justifying their use because they think that this is the best way to learn, or, this is, the way we've always done it. And, every seventh grader has to, go through, like you were talking about your son, every seventh grader has to dissect a frog. But, it is not an effective way to learn. It simply is not. And our new systematic review paper shows that in 95% of studies, students at all educational levels scored as well as or better in most cases when they use non-animal methods compared to animal dissection. Medical schools no longer use animals for dissection, so we would be doing a disservice to students who want to pursue careers in medicine by having them dissect animals as opposed to using a modern cutting-edge teaching tool, such as digital dissection, and et cetera.
How can we make the difference if you're testing out a new instrument or a new tool? How can that be done if not using an actual animal or actual physical body in front of you?
So there is a synthetic dissectable frog called syn frog, and very similar to, a preserved frog or a frog cadaver. You can actually use a scalpel. You can pin, the syn frog's feet down to your dissection tray. You can identify all the organs. Everything is anatomically correct. So that, there is a hands-on option, of course, as well. And, that's what we're really hoping that every school will start using, more humane non-animal methods instead of just, reverting to the way it's always been done.
I understand, again, that PETA has their Teach Kind curriculum. And on this program, we've actually gone through, had interviews with people who were able to discuss what the Teach Kind curriculum actually is. How is that related to, or is that related to what you're trying to do now or advance now?
Yeah, absolutely. It is related. So teaching empathy at a young age, or really not even teaching empathy. Young people have a natural instinct and natural affinity, for animals. They love them. They immediately know that dissecting an animal is wrong. And, they also know that, perhaps after cutting apart a cat, at school, then they go home and the companion cat snuggles up on their lap, and then it sort of connects, then these students get, then they understand that this is wrong, but generally speaking, they understand that, initially. But building empathy, or really just preserving that empathy that already exists in young people, is a wonderful tool for creating a better community, creating more compassionate students. And as they go through school and they learn these lessons, they will not only respect their peers, but they also will respect all animals. And that is a very important lesson. So Teach Kind has empathy building curricula and, worksheets and lesson plans and rescue stories about animals. And, the whole point is really to extend that golden rule to animals. So all of this is connected. It is all, part of Teach Kind.
So talk to us a little bit about what the Replacing Animals in Science Education, or the RAISE Coalition, is all about.
Oh, absolutely. I love this. So PETA's Replacing Animals in Science Education, or RAISE Coalition, is working to end the use of animals in classrooms based on educational, ethical, environmental, and student safety factors. So the whole goal of the coalition is to support and empower school districts to embrace the exclusive use of modern non-animal teaching methods by creating district policies and also legislation. So it is really a support group for folks in education.
Now, I was going to ask you how they can actually, or how the school districts and communities can get involved in this. What are you saying, that the coalition will support them in reaching out to their local politicians, or support them in reaching out to their local school boards of education so that they can perhaps start changing curriculum? Absolutely.
Well, so it is interesting that you brought up curricula, because animal dissection is not required in any curricula in the United States. It is not in the next generation science standards. It's not in the college board. So like for, AP biology, for example, it's not in that curricula. It's also not in the International Baccalaureate curricula. So it's just, not a thing that exists anymore. It did, 30, 40 years ago, but it is no longer.
So I think, now that you mentioned that, I think especially for those families that have students that are taking the International Baccalaureate or the Advanced Placement AP courses, I think that might be something really important for them to really know, that when they're taking their AP bio class or the IB bio class, that dissection may not appear, or if it may appear in a different way. So talk to us a little bit about what are those alternatives to the physical dissection that they could partake in.
Oh, absolutely. So non-animal dissection methods include interactive digital dissection software, which is aligned with science standards, also dissectable synthetic models like SynFrog, simulated experiments, and more. And studies show that students who use these humane dissection methods outperformed their peers who dissected animals. So it really is a no-brainer, if you'll excuse the term, for teachers, right? As a former educator myself, I taught college biology for over 12 years. And, I know that there is that line of, effort to get students excited about science, but you also, you should never, ever deter students from learning and exercising their, rights to opt out of animal dissection. Of course, I never used any animal dissection and taught college bio for, many, many years, but other professors have used animal dissection. And when comparing, again, student learning outcomes with, my classes and, others who dissected animals, it is so clear that animal dissection is no longer, and really never was, is not the way to teach. The goal is for these students to learn anatomy, perhaps animal anatomy just for the sake of animal anatomy, or perhaps, animal anatomy for a comparative, anatomy purpose so that they can learn about the human body. But the goal has never been, can these students use a scalpel? Do they know how to, open up a body, right? Like, we're not teaching surgery here. It's simply for anatomy purpose.
And, I think that's a really important piece to understand, that it's not about it's not about the methods of, like you said, opening up the body or anything like that we're teaching, because how many times does the typical 7th grader or even 10th or 11th grader really need to hold a sharp instrument? We want to try to get those instruments out of their hands. Right. So I think it makes sense, therefore, to go the digital route, as opposed, and even the using virtual reality. I know I've seen places or companies that have introduced using virtual reality software where you actually have the 3D glasses on and you're manipulating the bodies that way. So is that another option that is available to regular K-12 schools?
Absolutely. And those are really, really great methods. Whatever the teachers want to use, whatever gets them excited about science, sort of renews their interest in, teaching is great, as long as it doesn't include an animal.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today, talking about PETA's Replacing Animals in Science Education Coalition, or RAISE, is Samantha Crowe, Manager of Science Education for PETA. So we talked a little bit about the digital and virtual resources or options that are available as opposed to using the physical specimens. Aren't those kind of expensive for schools, the regular schools, to utilize? Is there a way to kind of mitigate these expenses?
Well, actually, it's just the opposite. So repeatedly purchasing animal bodies and all the supplies that go along with it is actually much more expensive than, purchasing software that can be, used school-wide and year to year. It also is, so there's an immediate cost savings, right, by switching to humane non-animal methods. And then there are other reasons to do so as well. There's formaldehyde exposure, which is a concern because it is a carcinogen. There is the safety concern. You mentioned, we were talking about scalpels and and that sort of thing. It's there's a safety concern with students, having sharp objects, of course. And there is, of course, again, goes back to the efficacy. Using non-animal methods is much more efficacious. It allows students to repeat the material until they are proficient. And it also allows them to, fully understand, what they're, learning, as opposed to cutting apart, a monochromatic, very stinky, very toxic preserved frog.
And, I think that's another deterrent that a lot of students have as far as dissecting the actual specimens. And you already mentioned the smell of the formaldehyde. You talk about the sight of the blood and other things that come about. And I know a few students or a few classmates of my own that failed the class or that lab because they just couldn't stand the sight of blood and they didn't want to see the inner organs of the frog that we were cutting and so forth, or even the fetal pig when some classes like that. So it kind of takes that element out of the equation now, and students can just get right into the meat of the content without having all of the ancillary discussing parts of it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But it is, I mean, that is true, but it is also bigger than that. It's not just, the like squeamish, like, oh, this is grossing me out. I don't want to do it. It is an actual trauma response in many cases when students are forced or even asked sometimes, to dissect an animal that goes against their, ethics. And it is, very concerning. It's not just the queasiness or the blood or, that sort of thing. It is an actual physiological trauma response, which actually makes it completely impossible to learn. And that is just how our brains are.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because we know we started focusing a lot, especially within the pandemic years. We focus a lot on the mental health of our students. And if we're talking about forcing them or even just suggesting to them to dissect an animal live or not, that goes directly to their mental ability, their mental health as well. And we don't necessarily think of that. But I think we probably need to start thinking or rethinking our curriculum and how that really impacts our students from a mental health perspective.
I agree. Our students have been through so much, over the last few years. My daughter actually just, graduated last May from high school. So now she's in college, but, she had to, experience the issues with, the pandemic and, the quick pivot to remote learning and, all of the things that students have, had to deal with recently, and then you add in, school shootings and, other trauma inducing events. And, really these students need the education, but we have to keep our eyes on empathy building, and we have to make sure that we are not inducing trauma. We have to be trauma informed, and we also need equity in education.
Now, we start talking, I'm glad you mentioned the equity in education piece of it, because you mentioned earlier one of the alternatives that we can utilize, and that was the Sin Frog. How can people really get their hands on that? And two, what are some of the other alternatives that digitally or otherwise that may be available to them as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Sin Frog is amazing. It is a synthetic dissectable frog. It's reusable. It has the anatomical, like all of the anatomical landmarks that one would want in a frog. And, folks can go to PETA.org/synfrog, SYN for synthetic. They can also go to PETA.org/dissection. There's also a lot of information there about the Sin Frog, and other methods that can be used instead of animals. So I think that's probably the best site to go to there is PETA.org/dissection.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the Merge Labs, the products that they actually have as far as when it comes to the digital or video dissection options?
Oh my goodness. When you were talking about virtual reality, that is the first thing that I thought of was the Merge Cube. So it's this, handheld, like Rubik's Cube size, cube. And you can use, 3D goggles, or you can use your phone and sort of like, or even a tablet, and when you aim the camera of whatever device you're using at this just plain cube that you're holding in your hand, it is immediately transformed into a beating heart or breathing lungs. And you can manipulate it in, 3 dimensions, all the way around, or 360, I guess is what I should have said. 360 degrees. You can manipulate this cube. You can see all of the anatomical landmarks and really understand what this heart looks like, the size, how it functions.
Yeah, I think that's really the important piece of this whole thing, that it's not just that you're actually able to see something that's functioning in real time, so to speak, as opposed to you're still looking at the theory aspect, because it's in the case of a heart is not beating. In the case of the brain, the synapses aren't firing. So you're really just looking at something that you could look at in a book.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that teaching not only the anatomy piece, but also the physiology piece, these things are absolutely impossible with teachers using animal cadavers, right? So, yeah, it certainly, is time to move away from that and move toward the higher tech, more efficacious methods, that are already in use in schools around the U.S.
Aside from, I guess, teaching students about empathy towards animals, what the Teach Kind curriculum does, and helping to prevent the trauma that we discussed that students can experience, what are some of the other benefits of using the digital or virtual dissection resources? There
are many, many benefits to using humane non-animal methods, such as, helping to protect the environment, helping to protect students. So there are student safety factors with, formaldehyde and that sort of thing. Also, just the ethics of cutting apart an animal who was once alive. Students are very in tune with animals, and the educational benefit of using humane non-animal methods has been shown to be superior repeatedly.
So, and I'm also thinking that the other, I guess, unintended benefit is you provide students, because I think we talked about access. So you provide students with multiple opportunities to try out the particular resources. And so if it's digital, they can do something at home, or they can log in from a remote place, so they don't always have to be in the classroom to get the learning. So if a student is absent on the day that lab is done, they still have access to the lab because they can do it at home. Or if they happen to mess up on it, they can try it over and over again without needing another cadaver in front of them to replace it and so forth. So I think those are some of the other benefits, especially that like medical school students are using the software for now.
Yeah, absolutely. When the pandemic hit and students were, suddenly shifted to remote learning, digital dissection software was huge. Everybody, really wanted to, the educators really wanted to continue that, continue providing resources, for students, even though, they were learning at home. And we found that digital dissection software was perfect for that because, like you said, students are able to repeat the material until they're proficient. They don't only have one opportunity to make the right cut, and they're also not being exposed to formaldehyde, which is, again, a concern.
And of course, we know we definitely want to keep our students safe while they're in school or wherever they get their learning from. So let me ask you, what can parents and caregivers do to, I guess, put pressure is the wrong term, but to convince their school systems to go the route of the digital dissection?
I think, parents are instrumental in making change in schools. I think that a first step is just to support their student. Their students are, many students are very, very much opposed to dissecting animals in the classroom. And I think that, if parents can simply support their child's choice, and also they can always contact their child's administrator, ask them to simply embrace humane science and end any lessons that involve animals. Community members can also contact their local school district and, simply find out what their policies are on using animals in the classroom. And of course, students themselves who are faced with animal dissection can ask for a humane alternative activity.
I think that's important as well, because I think it's really important for students to understand that they actually do have a voice in not only for this particular topic, but for any curricular issues, that they do have a voice that they can go and speak to their school administrators or even their school boards of education so that they can get their ideas across as well. So I think this whole idea is not just ending the using dissection on actual animals, but it's really teaching students about advocacy. And so it really goes just beyond just the science of it, but it goes into other areas that students can start to learn about as well that they may not be learning in other classes.
That's exactly right. Some of our empathy building curricula, that we have at Teach Kind, really does focus on the golden rule and including animals in that golden rule. And I think that, opening the eyes of educators to just how simple it is to, incorporate humane education and also, encourage your students to be their own advocates. We certainly don't want we don't want to dissuade anyone from pursuing a career in science. We certainly don't want to disenfranchise any students who, are ethically opposed to dissecting animals, understandably so. And, so we want to make the classroom a more inclusive learning environment. And one way to do that is to stop dissecting animals in the classroom. Because, and this is very important, not every student who is ethically opposed to dissecting an animal will be brave enough to speak up. Not every student will do that. And so, it is our job to, we were talking about protecting, the health of students in the classroom and, making the classroom a safe environment. It also needs to be an inclusive learning environment, where no one feels left out and no one's dissuaded from, getting excited about science. Cutting up animals is just so archaic, and it's honestly still boggles the mind that it is ongoing,
So one more time, where can our listeners go to get more information on this topic, including a listing of some suggested digital dissection resources?
Absolutely, yeah. So listeners can go to PETA.org/dissection to join the movement to end animal dissection. There are easy to follow action steps for teachers and parents and students. And there also are many of, the non-animal methods that, we're sort of, pushing towards, and advocating for. Some of those are also there. So it's PETA.org/dissection.
Great. Thank you very much. And we would definitely like to thank our guest today, Samantha Crowe, Manager of Science Education for PETA, for coming on to our show.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.